Great League Remix is going to be the big next rotation format that we're gonna have this week. So let's see what we have going on here, because today we're gonna dive together pretty deep into Great League Remix with my 4 team recommendations, trying to analyze the strongest assets, how you can play each team individually towards your advantage, check the synergies, the strategies, and of course the core breakers along the way. So with the first team recommendation out of the total 4, so stay tuned till the end for that, you're gonna check out that we have already in action our Vigoroth. At the back, we're gonna pair up this amazing spammer with Rock Slide now with our Mandibuzz and Cresselia, 2 very bulky options. If you do not have Cresselia or Mandibuzz ready to go, feel free to replace them with something like a Hypno or a Bombardier if you feel like you're a spicy lad out there, because this team can still work only because of its typings. We have less threats here to counter with this team, so we're gonna be just on the perfect spot, the perfect way to outplay our opponents with our amazing backline being pretty bulky as well. Of course, up in front, Vigoroth is gonna be a safe lead overall, but it is gonna struggle a lot against those fighters. So here is where the backline comes into play, able to either destroy down that fighting or just feel free to rotate around your Cresselia to draw out something else that your Vigoroth is afraid of, and then you're gonna have the upper hand. Red Steel and Bastiodon are not gonna be in the picture for this format, but still Steelix is still gonna be around. Breaking Swipe was not that kind to that Pokemon being nerfed this season, but still you're gonna see, I believe, a lot of Steelixes along the way. Of course, now that you do not have Bulldoze on your Vigoroth, you might be in a pickle, so you can always try to draw it out with your Cresselia, try to finish it off with the combined efforts of Cresselia and Vigoroth, and perhaps then Mandibuzz will have no other severe weakness for the entire meta. I think that you need to have Krasnod no matter what on your Cresselia, which is a legacy move, and of course in order to bring that Cresselia below 1500 CP, or at least at the exact mark, you need to trade for it. So this is a pretty weird Pokemon to have. So once again, I'm gonna repeat myself, you can always replace that Cresselia with something like a Hypno, because this is another heavy Pokemon, pretty spammy as well, with those elemental punches that can definitely take for the spot of the safe switch for this team. So with that said, now we're gonna leave this team, let it be as it is, and now let's move forward into team number 2. Skarmory is another big winner from this season's move update, and that is mainly because of its ability to get access to the Steel Wing. So with that move now, it is more effective than ever for that Skarmory to reach to those charge attacks, Sky Attack and Brave Bird. You do not even need Flash Cannon, and of course you get access to a move that can easily finish off Carbink if you are just a little bit careful, because if you don't know already, Skarmory can easily farm down without spending any charge attacks at all up against that Carbink, which is pretty great if you ask me. And with that in mind, we have only one weak Pokemon to the Carbink, and that is on the backline with our Gaslord. So alongside Gaslord, we're also gonna pair up this Pokemon with our Jellicent, which is a pretty effective safe switch as well, and I really recommend this Pokemon to you in whatever team you are gonna try out, because not a lot of dark types are gonna be around, and even if you have a dark type, something like a Mandibuzz up against you, you can always surprise them with that Ice Beam of yours. I have here Surf and Shadow Ball, but I think that for this meta, perhaps Shadow Ball will not do the trick. Of course, only time will tell. I have it here once again, but you can always replace it with Ice Beam to get extra coverage to those Gaslords, to those Mandibuzzes, and you are definitely not gonna regret that for some really neat, super effective damage. At the back, Gaslord can always use Crunch, can always use Brutal Swing, but be sure that you definitely need to have Drown Claw on your arsenal, because with Crunch or Brutal Swing, you basically do the same job out there, so you can always play around those two. You either go for the extra damage and Brutal Swing, or just sacrifice a little bit of a damage to get your hands on Crunch and perhaps a potential debuff along the way. So that is gonna be all about this team, but first, before we hop into the next one, let's see what we have as a core breaker. This Pokemon is an electric type with access to destroying down every single individual Pokemon of us. It has Discharge and Volt Switch for our Skarmory, can go pretty well up against our Jellicent, especially if it doesn't have Shadow Ball, and of course those X Scissors are gonna do pretty much effective work being neutral up against our Guzzlord. But I would not be that much worried about Charge Attack. There are always ways to play around it. Feel free to rotate around your Jellicent, and in the end game perhaps you can absolutely wall it down with a few shields remaining on your Guzzlord. We're finally to the point that I will showcase to you trainers my favorite team on this list of 4 team recommendations. So this team is gonna be pretty strong, especially with those charge attacks, able to reach there fairly fast, and of course now with Icy Wind being added on Poliwrath, you have nothing to worry about. About Poliwrath, one last thing before we hop into the other 2 Pokemon, the Core Breaker, I think that you definitely have to play this Pokemon as a regular one. I have here a Shadow, but of course you can always avoid that. But if you have a Shadow build up like mine, since I do not have a regular one ready to go with decent IVs, just go ahead and use that Shadow one. But overall I still think that the regular Poliwrath, non-Shadow at all, is gonna perform much better, especially up in front, able to debuff the opponent much more, which is pretty great if you ask me. Now at the back we have a Dugong and a Chargeback, 2 Pokemon that can rely a lot on those charge attacks, and of course they have some heavy energy gain and fast attacks. So as a core breaker you have seen here that I have Cresselia, and that's mainly because of its psychic typing. This Pokemon with Grass Knot can definitely threat around my top Pokemon, my top lead Pokemon, which is Poliwrath, and of course at the back, even with the debuffs, it is gonna have a soft win up against my Dugong, but that is the key. Dugong, even against the worst counter out there, will have a soft loss, which is pretty great, which means that with a little bit of synergy you can always overcome that obstacle as well. For your charge attack now, you do not need crunch at all. I believe that for this meta, Volt Switch is gonna be the main fast attack, while Discharge and X Scissor is gonna be all you need. Of course, we have here a lot of legacy moves, so you need a lot of elite TMs or just to participate in a lot of events to have these moves on your Pokemons, but still when you do, you're gonna see that in no time you can make quick work of your opponent. One last thing before you go off this team and head to the final one, Chargeback is also a core breaker for this team, but of course Dugong can always play around that Pokemon as well, especially after that first Icy Wind. Now for the final one, we have a weird team composition, but it might remind you a team line from that Open Great League format, and that's mainly because we're using here Propobus instead of Bastiodon as our closer. So this team could easily be seen as a Gligar, Bastiodon and Serperior on the Open Great League format, using Serperior as a safe switch to draw out something like a fighter or whatever, try to finish it off then with your Gligar, and perhaps right after you're gonna have the upper hand against whatever with your heavy closer. So for this incident we're gonna replace that Bastiodon with a Propobus, and to my surprise Propobus with Zap Cannon is gonna be absolutely insane. Able to have the ability to debuff the opponent now is gonna be pretty good while you have a heavy nuke on your Pokemon. This weird mustache Pokemon is still gonna perform pretty well with the other move, and I think that Rock Slide should be your next big charge attack. So with that said, now let's see what we have as a core breaker here, because we're using a Pokemon like Dragonair on this weird left side graph or whatever you want to call it, because Dragonair has access to Aqua Tail, which can threat both of our lead option and perhaps on the closing games, especially if shields are up our Propobus. So for Propobus you definitely need to get your hands to a double Rock Slide to finish that Dragonair, because even a simple Zap Cannon will not be enough to finish it off, since Zap Cannon is always resisted. And speaking of resisted moves, well, Serperior also doesn't have a lot to offer against Dragonair, so you can see as to how that Dragonair threat can be a severe threat for this team. But other than that, I think you're gonna be just fine and you have nothing else to lose up against a Dragonair team. This team is pretty strong, pretty heavy charge attacks, especially with the Frenzy Plant, the Rock Slide, the Zap Cannon, or even the Dig from your Gligar, so you have nothing to worry about when using a pretty strong team like this, and your opponents will definitely not expect something like a Propobus at the closing scenario. So that is gonna be all for today, trainers. Thank you for watching and for staying till the end. Just be sure to leave a huge like before you go, subscribe to the channel if you are new to my content, and with that said, I hope to see you all into the next one.